Buongiorno a tutti, vi saluto e vi do il benvenuto a questo appuntamento di Smart Life Festival 2025. Siamo nella giornata conclusiva e siamo all'inizio di un appuntamento molto importante a cui il festival tiene in maniera particolare. L'edizione di quest'anno è dedicata, come sapete, al tema "Non c'è più internet, nuove connessioni per l'umanità digitale". La volontà e l'intenzione del festival è quella di riflettere sullo stato delle connessioni e dei canali digitali ad oggi e soprattutto in questo caso su come l'arte e le discipline artistiche possono aiutarci a condurre una riflessione su quello che è lo stato dell'arte, appunto delle connessioni, e su come poter effettivamente comprendere tutte quelle che sono le dimensioni anche nascoste dei canali digitali e della nostra vita digitale. Siamo estremamente contenti di avere con noi qui oggi Nadim Samman, critico, curatore e autore di un libro recentemente edito per l'UIS University Press, Criptopoetica, un lavoro estremamente interessante che proprio ci condurrà attraverso l'esame di opere di diversi artisti a capire come l'arte si interroga e cerca effettivamente di indagare quali sono le dimensioni nascoste della tecnologia e del digitale. Con lui dialogherà Federica Patti, critica e curatrice a sua volta. Ringraziamo anche Federica per essere qui con noi. Un appuntamento, mi preme ricordare, che è realizzato in collaborazione con Fondazione Ago, Modena Fabbriche Culturali, e con l'UIS University Press, senza il cui prezioso contributo appunto non avrebbe potuto realizzarsi. Lascio senz'altro la parola ai nostri ospiti e vi auguro un buon incontro.
Grazie Gabriele, grazie a tutte e tutti e soprattutto grazie al nostro ospite Nadim Samman per questa occasione di confronto e di presentazione di quella che è una ricerca appunto, oserei dire, mastodontica, che coinvolge più di 40 artisti, diversi formati, una pubblicazione, una mostra, un sito tuttora consultabile e una serie di incontri anche di divulgazione e approfondimento. Noi oggi ci concentriamo sul formato che potete anche trovare all'ingresso, che è quello della pubblicazione, dal titolo Criptopoetica, in inglese Poetics of Encryption, che appunto nella prospettiva di Samman identifica in un certo senso quello che potremmo chiamare una sorta di chiave interpretativa per la decriptazione della opacità esoterica della tecnologia attraverso le proposte, le pratiche, in un certo senso anche l'esempio stesso di una serie di artisti internazionali con cui sei entrato in contatto nei tuoi anni di ricerca e di professione curatoriale. Mi piacerebbe chiederti appunto di iniziare un po' da questo, da come è nata l'idea della criptopoetica, quindi della poetica della decriptazione, se sei appunto arrivato a conoscere e a concepire questa teoria, in un certo senso questa tesi, attraverso il dialogo con gli artisti e le opere che poi presenti sia nel libro che hai presentato anche in mostra, o se in un certo senso era quasi come una sorta di appunto idea, di ipotesi che orbitava in un certo senso nel tuo sguardo, nel tuo pensiero, che hai effettivamente poi incontrato nelle pratiche degli artisti.
At the time, there was a term, and for this sort of, you could call it movement, or you could call it at least a kind of vibe within artistic circles. They called it post-internet art. These were artists that said everything has changed after our as it were, absorption into the online space, and specifically our absorption into social media and all the channels of communication and information, the information landscape that emerged more or less around Web 2.0. So one of the ideas was not just that this new information system affects the style of art. It's not just about as some people thought, just the rapid consumption of images, the amount of heterogeneous, that is to say, wildly sort of strange sort of inputs that people would have. Not just about the style of how things looked, but really how did the fundamentally new conditions of always being online, of always being connected to a technical system, how did they change the very fabric of our lived experience? So I think in the 90s there was a lot of talk about the beginnings of the idea of virtual reality and some quite sort of utopian sort of ideas about kind of this wide open space of infinite possibility, of perhaps temporary autonomous zones online, about having a radically different perhaps social experience or personal identity in virtual reality. But I think right about the time of the early 2000s, something started to change. Utopia started to crumble before our eyes. And the first signs of this, I think, were a stylistic approach, wherein I think we saw a lot of these sort of artists of the post-internet group playing with sort of these more cynical-looking figures, these very slick avatars. Everything looked futuristic, but somehow the futuristic was looking a little bit cynical. Yeah. But I think this sort of cynical visual sort of styling was quite in line with the rest of the late 90s, and and it was something about, we're futurists, we just kind of run all the way into a kind of, a sort of a cynical capitalist modality. But that wasn't the real shift. The real shift was something else. It was a political cynicism, and I think, or at least a kind of a political disenchantment. And that, I think, you can date pretty well precisely to around the time of the emergence of WikiLeaks and the release of the video known as Collateral Murder, in which the Americans were seen to be bombing unarmed civilians. Now, you went from WikiLeaks into the Snowden revelations and so on, and I think around that time there started to be a kind of, as I said, this political disenchantment, in which it was understood that technology hasn't been this empowering thing, that the promises that the Silicon Valley had been offering us, and that sort of, you could say, capitalism has been offering us, were somehow obscuring some deeper machinations and some very troubling realities. Simply put, there starts to be a distrust of the digital space, of online space, of technology as a whole, and a sense, I think a general cultural sense, that there are many more things happening behind the scenes than we're fully aware of. I mean, we are being surveilled all the time. What happens to that data? How is it used? In the most extreme cases, you see these political, sort of oppressions emerging, but then I think beyond these sort of charismatic martyrs, like Snowden and Assange, we start to feel, and artists start to feel, actually we're all a kind of Saint Sebastian, shot through with the vectors of the surveillance gorgon, turned to stone or punctured in some way. And I think this is the beginning of my interest in sort of looking, well, how are artists talking about this feeling or this general cultural shift? And the more I looked at the work that was being produced, the more I got it became pretty clear to me that there was a kind of movement to oppose the idea, the rhetorical proposition of transparency, right? Silicon Valley says the new tech is opening the world up, it's making everything more transparent, it's putting knowledge at your fingertips, it's allowing you to project your will intellectually and otherwise, without limit. Everything is opening up through the digital revolution. Whereas, as I've alluded to earlier, I think the artists kind of push back and they say, no, actually, the world is getting more closed, counterfactually. It might seem not to be the case, but actually we live in amid a proliferating landscape of black boxes, that is, systems we don't understand.
Visto che hai citato il caso, l'esempio della black box, possiamo anche entrare magari nel dettaglio di come effettivamente hai organizzato questa tua esposizione, che non per nulla abbiamo definito esplicitamente anche rivolta a una sorta di esoterismo di queste pratiche tecnologiche e di disvelazione invece di quelle artistiche. Tu organizzi il discorso appunto attraverso, diciamo, 3 cardini che sono black box, siti oscuri e buchi neri. Magari potresti raccontarci di questi 3 casi, 3 artisti che hai proprio nominato come esempi e anche a che cosa ti riferisci con questi esempi.
Yeah, so just to follow up on where I left off, because I think that connects, to what you're saying. The idea being that we can't all speak the language of code. We cannot all write code. We cannot all program, and even those of us who are coders are not fluent in every code language that's out there. We can't all be specialists in every technical system that is out there. So, and even if we could learn, we're often also locked out. We're locked out because these systems are proprietary. They're encrypted. You're not given the key, as it were, to actually tinker with the code too. Which is to say that this sort of mystery of the tech is very real. It's not an esoteric idea to say it's a mystery. It's a technical reality that we face in our everyday life. And this is where the term black box comes in. A black box is a term from cybernetics. It refers to any unit of hardware or software or system in general, where you know what the input is, you know what the output is, but you don't know what the conversion mechanism is. Yeah? So I think we are sort of surrounded by these things at all times. But also remember, on aeroplanes, the black box is the recording device that records everything. So these black boxes are both at the same time. So look, yeah. So I mean, it's almost a kind of the way it's set up. It's almost like how do you make sense of this in terms of from human to human? If you don't speak the technical language, but you still want to talk about the object, the system, the experience, you have to reach for metaphors, and you have to reach for images and narratives, and you could call that the old language of reality. And so it's funny, when you start to talk about mysteries, of course, the images you lean on, they seem to be borrowed from an earlier time. Art has been talking about the mysterious, the inexpressible, or the inaccessible since the beginning of art. So I was thinking, and this was really brought home to me when I saw an artwork by an artist called Carsten Nicolai, which was a gigantic black rhomboid, a polyhedron. And it's this black object, and when you get close to it, it vibrates, it senses you. You don't know how it's sensing you. It turns out it's a theremin. It's relating to electrical current. But that rhomboid was the same form, he borrowed it from Albrecht Dürer's famous print, Melancholy, which is an allegory for the experience of melancholy. And I thought, is that rhomboid not the iPhone? So, how do you imagine yourself in relation to the black box of cybernetics, right? I would argue that if you're not working in the actual code itself of these systems, you work in the metaphor of the image or a narrative, or you imagine yourself as you are, embodied. So are you inside it? Are you outside it? Or where are you? Or where is it? So, I mean, that's really the metaphors in the book really proceed from this very basic relation. Black site means you're buried alive, you're surrounded by tech, you're somehow captured, you're contained. You maybe you don't even know where you are inside the system. Perhaps you would like to escape. Perhaps you would like to, find the heart of the labyrinth and kind of unpick the lock if you want. So that's being locked in, black site. The opposite of that is being locked out. That's, the position of Madame Melancholy in Dürer's print. You're gazing at this inscrutable object, this black box. You would like to penetrate to the center and understand what's inside, but of course you can only deal with the surface or the interface. And then the third one was black hole, and that's another matter. So, I mean, this plays out really concretely in the space of art. So the first real artwork, I think, that took on the topic of Google Earth and Google Street View, I mean, really the Google sort of suite as regards to spatial navigation, was a video called by John Raffman called You, the World and I from 2011. And in this video, the narrator is someone who is searching for an image of his lost lover, who he remembers never wanted their photo taken, but he remembers that once when they were on holiday in Italy, actually, that she was photographed by a Google car. And so he doesn't remember on what street or where, but he searches and searches Google Earth until finally he finds this picture of her, thus recovering this image. And he revisits the image every day on Google Earth until one day it's deleted. This video was a retelling of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, explicitly so. And I thought, wow, this artist is trying to talk about the newest, most, I think, revolutionary sort of piece of consumer sort of technology, and the Google Maps suite. And he's reaching out for the ancient myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. It's about a search and recovery operation. It's about literally a descent into, like, the sort of the underworld, the matrix, if you want, of the image archive to recover something that's valuable that has been lost. And so that set up the metaphor. And I suppose this, what you've called a Neoplatonic sort of frame. And then I couldn't stop seeing it, as I say. So many artists are concerned with, digging into the system, recovering some hidden truth, bringing it back up to the surface, maybe photographing the locations where the fiber optic cables come out of the ocean, such as an artist, Evan Roth, who showed here recently. And I've got to pause for the translator. So you have this descent, literally, from the cloud, or the clouds from the virtual into the physical, maybe. You have artists who even return to, they seek out the mines where the minerals that are used to create circuit boards and computer chips are extracted from. So they want to kind of pierce the veil of the screen and kind of, descend into the hell, even an ecological hell behind the electronic device. They want to recover something valuable. So that's black site. That is, kind of moving around, burrowing in, maybe mapping this labyrinth. And then the flip side of being locked in is being locked out. That's black box. This is all about attending a pure interface as it works on you. So you have artists who are they really are making black obelisks, So like that sculpture I told you from Castanicoli, but you have many others too, many other films that seem to be interested in these sort of inscrutable sculptural systems. But then and then I'll ask you for another question. The flip side of that is, the real black box is the real, like, inscrutable object is the one that pretends to be transparent. Okay? It's the one that says, I'm not there. I'm just a window onto the world. I'm just something that you don't need to pay attention to, as everything kind of opens up before you. That's the real black box. And so you find artists also looking at things like, I'm going to make a whole exhibition about perspex and transparency. Transparency becomes an issue too. And I'll let you ask a question since I talk too much.
Translation first. Sì, ti volevo interrompere solo prima di tornare alla trasparenza, cosa che sicuramente faremo più tardi, per sottolineare come a me abbia colpito la tua individuazione di quegli artisti che lavorano proprio matericamente con i materiali, non tanto di scarto quanto originali della tecnologia, quindi è uno scavare, un andare in profondità, nella profondità più oscura della terra attraverso i materiali. Penso alle sculture di Julien Charrière, questa restituzione quasi della matericità che poi diventa trasparenza nel nostro uso comune, ma che in realtà ha una provenienza propriamente terrea e materica.
Yeah, so one of the things the book is trying to do is to cross a wire between conversations around, where the discourse around ecology is in contemporary art, and the conversations around the theme of the Anthropocene, which was a huge topic over the last 10 years, where artists were very concerned with, how is our humanity's ecological footprint, what does it look like, and so on. But at the same time, there was this this other sort of topic around we're all online, what is reality anyway? And then the two come together, I think, and I really try to hammer that home in the book. Simply put, this, the imagination of like the cloud, the imagination of a weightless, floating, atmosphere of signs and symbols and virtual realities, they're all grounded in physical reality. They all spring from a mine somewhere. They spring from, petrochemical extraction, industry, and so on. And then they run up from there through sort of economics and politics before they can become a kind of attitude or a vibe. And so I think that's one of the things that's been happening in art in the last 10 years is saying, we really can't be operating in these binaries between like virtuality and materiality and kind of, and sort of like environment on the one hand, and earth and space and place and the digital. The two are absolutely bound up completely. In fact, the digital is reordering the physical space more than anything else.
Proseguendo nel racconto di quello che è la criptopoetica, hai accennato al secondo termine che comunque caratterizza tutto il progetto espositivo, ma anche quello di pubblicazione, che è il Tecnocene. Però poi appunto arriva in un certo senso a presentare questa analisi che appunto ci stai raccontando anche attraverso la pratica degli artisti, verso delle conclusioni che innanzitutto sono quella della trasparenza, cioè si va sempre di più dall'opacità di cui parlavamo, dall'oscurità di cui parlavamo, soprattutto dei sistemi tecnologici, verso questa sorta di immaterialità totale della tecnologia, quasi come le sfere che tu citi anche nel libro, le sfere aristoteliche che una volta circondavano la Terra appunto nella visione aristotelica del sistema solare. Però tornando alle conclusioni appunto che citi, parli poi in realtà anche di sistemi di ironia e di coreografie che possono essere appunto messe in pratica anche attraverso i riferimenti alle opere d'arte che hai presentato, come sistemi in un certo senso mi verrebbe da dire di riattivazione degli utenti / dell'audience e degli spettatori. Intanto ti volevo chiedere se è un'interpretazione corretta quella che ho dato delle fila un po' che hai cercato di tirare alla fine di questo tuo excursus, di questa tua ricerca, e poi appunto per cercare un po' di cominciare a vedere in un certo senso oltre questa situazione, no? Quindi se parlavamo dell'inizio del 2000, ora del 2010, come appunto dell'epoca in cui questa black box, questa opacità della tecnologia è esplosa anche nelle pratiche degli artisti. A tuo avviso il 2020 che cosa ci sta raccontando? Ci sta raccontando di un re-empowerment, di un ritorno alla possibilità di azione anche politica, non solo estetica, oppure stiamo andando verso altre direzioni da un punto di vista artistico e tecnologico?
So I still think it must sound weird, all these references to kind of Aristotle and Neoplatonism and the esotericism and the occult, but I think this is to the point. The sort of like I just say the if you want to call it like the obscurantist imaginary, the kind of the focus on the mystery or the inaccessible is alive and present and only growing stronger in this age of total datification, which would seem so strange. But let me make another example for you. It has been said by a scholar of religious studies, Messiah Eliade, that the discovery of iron, the production of iron in the Iron Age, the forge, birthed a whole new pantheon of gods. Okay, this is the birth of alchemy. So, watching iron ore be transformed in the forge into iron gave the idea that one material could be transubstantiated into another, and it gave the birth of the idea of perfecting the human soul, for example, through a practice like yoga, but it also gave a whole new host of gods like Thor, who's a smith god. And all these gods of metalwork and stuff emerge with the discovery of this material operation of turning iron ore into iron. So I ask you, now that we work with rare earth elements and all these new materials, and we have found we are able to manipulate them in a certain way, what gods are emerging now? What have they been telling us? They're telling us AI is going to be a new god. And they're saying, and we're not going to understand it when it arrives. And by the way, we also don't understand how these super powerful AI systems come to their decisions. We understand the parameters in the model, but we cannot follow the decision. We cannot retro-engineer the sort of decision path from what is generated. In these models, they talk about black box AI all the time. So again, it's not a wild metaphor. The proposition is there's this new God emerging right now through these very material circumstances and technological reality. And we all need to kind of get ready or quake before it. So I think that's disempowering because humans have created this God. It's a narrative like any other. And I guess what the book is trying to say is that, there are so many narratives around technology, and they're just as important as the technology itself. And artists, have taken it upon themselves to talk about what structures of narrative are out there, to try to invent new ones, and to bring up the topic of the metaphor as it relates to technical systems that claim to be real on their own.
Allora, intanto chiedendo se cominciano ad esserci domande rispetto a quanto stiamo affrontando con Nadim, rispetto anche appunto a quanto viene presentato nel libro. Un'altra domanda che volevo farti è legata appunto a quest'idea di divinizzazione non solo dell'oggetto, ma poi anche di chi questo oggetto in un certo senso lo detiene, lo ha coniato, lo ha forgiato, per rimanere appunto nella metafora neoplatonica, per non parlare del fatto che a me colpisce molto, devo dire, ti dicevo anche prima, il fatto che tu abbia individuato in questo sistema culturale, quindi quello classico. Il libro è pieno di riferimenti classici che per chi come me ha studiato appunto le discipline classiche del latino e del greco, appunto apre a una serie di eco culturali veramente molto interessanti. E ti dicevo, mi colpisce perché è una chiave di lettura che è insita nella cultura occidentale, mentre invece spesso si è sentito parlare appunto di interpretazione anche mistica in un certo senso della oscurità della tecnologia attraverso un pensiero magico che va a attribuire all'oggetto stesso il potere magico. Invece tu individui effettivamente nelle figure, nelle metafore, nelle allegorie che gli artisti disegnano la possibilità di decriptazione, quindi in un certo senso anche in un ruolo, in un certo senso appunto di medium dell'artista stesso fra tecnologia e arte. Ma appunto sto un po' divagando. Tornando a noi, volevo chiederti appunto quali sono a tuo avviso appunto poi le prossime evoluzioni dei sistemi tecnologici ma anche del sistema artistici. Tu stai già lavorando anche ad altri progetti, quindi se stai già vedendo un'evoluzione appunto possibilmente da de-empowerment a empowerment invece dello spettatore.
Well, interesting use of word. I mean, spectator or user or like author, agent. I mean, which one do you want, and would you pick another term? It's true that at least one of the approaches covered in the book is artistic attempts at decryption, but then there's also the attempt to re-encrypt the human subject for the gaze of the surveillance, sort of system, for the tracking, monster out there. How can we be invisible to the machine? How can we be, less transparent to the machine? And I think this might be again this sort of a desire for maybe a secret language or a kind of a conspiracy of friends is also in there. In as much as, out there are a lot of conspiracies in the political space, there also might be, welcome conspiracies amongst, your friends, amongst the communities you want to have, to agree we will not be visible to everyone and to every system out there, because we need to reserve a space to be the, humans in the way we have known it, or how we would like to kind of explore. This sort of intense kind of Silicon Valley futurism would, as it were, dissolve the human into a more than human assemblage or a hybrid. And you've got to ask yourself, do you want that? How can we, if you want to, how do you maintain an image of the human in the current, technological space? How much of it do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of? But I mean, can it be mine? So I think that re-encrypting, your social space, your private space, making art that is perhaps somehow unreadable to machine learning systems, if that's even possible, would be at least an aspiration. Or a dream of some sort. I think the idea of the private space is, even if it's not going to be realized very well under the pressures of our time, I think is going to be there bubbling away in the back of artists' minds, all the time. I think it's going to be the sort of the holy grail, if you want, privacy, at least for in your dreams.
Sì, io penso per esempio a proposito di chiavi narrative con cui la tecnologia viene presentata a tutti noi, a questa sorta di accessibilità, di facilità, no? Dell'utilizzo di alcuni degli strumenti che ci vengono forniti, soprattutto in chiave creativa, no? Quindi la possibilità di essere creator, raccontare se stessi attraverso l'immagine, quindi anche attraverso l'arte, ma che in realtà nasconde invece ancora una volta una difficoltà di comprensione del meccanismo stesso, o quantomeno una sorta di indirizzamento rispetto a quali sistemi e quali strumenti utilizzare, che sono di solito poi strumenti magari gratuiti ma proprietari, ma questo appunto è un altro enorme discorso. E forse possiamo concludere con la domanda che guida un po' questo festival, che internet c'è ancora, quale sarà il futuro di internet? Soprattutto te lo volevo chiedere in chiave curatoriale, è ancora a tuo avviso un ambiente esistente di per sé, anche da un punto di vista espositivo e artistico, oppure progressivamente sta, fra virgolette, scomparendo nella trasparenza di tutte le tecnologie? Quindi non avremo più schermi, non avremo più desktop, ma avremo sempre più l'internet delle cose e una immersività della tecnologia che ci circonda.
The question is, what kind of social spaces will exist or should exist online that are not social media as you know it through, Meta, Twitter, or whatever, X or whatever it is. What are the other social medias? What kind of spaces can be used to find each other without maybe being a source of data production for these massive tech companies? There are, of course, proliferations of different social platforms. There are sort of there are Discord communities. There are spaces where, they're much smaller networks that kind of meet and use this sort of the platform, but maybe the conversations are a little bit more focused. Maybe there's less trolling and so on. So I think we are looking for, a bit more safety in the digital space, or I think we're all a lot more wary of the idea of living in public. I think we understand that social media is a place for a play of masks, or at least we should. And this is all brought home, as you see now, that it's really feeding right into policing and things like that. So I think if it can't happen online, it will happen offline, and I think that the future of really interesting cultural developments is in rumors, in whispers overheard, in in these sorts of much more micro communities and conversations. And they could be facilitated online, but they don't always have to be. But I think the idea that everything happens in public as a default is what's going to go. At least for people who want to have a place to really experiment and not feel like it's going to come back to haunt them 30 years later when they want to, I don't know, cross the border into the US, or when they finally like got an actual job. You know, you have to find a place to experiment that isn't going to be tattooed on your forehead for the rest of your life.
Quasi un ritorno alla tradizione orale a proposito di riferimenti classici. Io torno a chiedere appunto al pubblico, ringraziandolo per l'attenzione, se ci sono delle domande, delle curiosità o delle condivisioni, delle idee che si vogliono presentare. Altrimenti ringrazio Nadim ancora una volta per la sua presenza oggi e soprattutto questa ricerca veramente epifanica in un certo senso, no? Di una prospettiva e anche di un ruolo in un certo senso che si può attribuire all'arte in confronto, in relazione alla tecnologia e alla società. Mi sembra non ci siano domande, quindi forse possiamo continuare appunto in un luogo più privato nelle nostre conversazioni. Grazie mille ancora.
Thank you.